February 17th, 1944, 4:47 in the morning. Captain Takeshi Saito stood on the bridge of the light cruiser Katori watching the horizon turn from deep purple to blood red. The air smelled wrong, not the usual salt and diesel he'd breathed for 27 years at sea. This was different. Smoke, burning oil, something chemical and wrong. He was 48 years old. Born in Hiroshima when the Emperor Meiji still ruled. Graduated from the Naval Academy in 1918 when the Great War was ending and Japan was ascending. Trained under Admiral Togo himself, the man who crushed the Russian fleet at Tsushima. The man who proved that courage and fighting spirit could defeat superior numbers. Saito believed in what the old admiral had taught him. Naval warfare was not about machines. It was about men, about honor, about getting close enough to look your enemy in the eye and proving your worth through sacrifice and skill. He believed you couldn't hit what you couldn't see. In 18 hours, that belief would kill him and every man under his command. But right now, at 4:47 on a Thursday morning in the Caroline Islands, Captain Saito was drinking tea. His orderly had brought it 3 minutes ago, still steaming in the porcelain cup Saito's wife had given him before he deployed. She'd wrapped it in silk and told him it would bring him home. He'd promised her it would. The tea was bitter. Good tea always was. On the desk in his cabin unopened was a letter from his son. 16 years old, the boy wanted to join the Navy after graduation. Saito had been planning to write back this morning, to tell the boy about duty and honor, to explain that the modern Navy needed men of spirit, not slaves to machines. That radar and computers were tools for cowards who couldn't trust their own eyes. He would never write that letter. The general alarm sounded at 4:48. For exactly 3 seconds, Saito didn't move. He was a professional. 27 years at sea, he'd heard alarms before. Drills, false contacts, nervous radar operators seeing ghosts on their screens. Then he heard the sound, not the alarm, something else, something deeper, a low rumble that grew and grew until it filled the air like an earthquake in the sky. He stepped out onto the bridge wing just as the first wave hit. 72 Grumman Hellcats, 54 Dauntless dive bombers, 36 Avenger torpedo bombers. They came out of the dawn like locusts, their engines screaming their bombs already falling. Truckatol, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, Japan's most protected naval base. A fortress that had stood untouched for 2 years, while American submarines prowled outside and American carriers stayed away. In the next 7 minutes, it became a graveyard. Saito grabbed the railing as the first bombs hit. Not close. Half a mile away near the seaplane base. Massive columns of water and fire shot into the air. The concussion rolled across the lagoon like thunder. Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamada burst onto the bridge. 31 years old, brilliant mind, top of his class at the academy, fire control officer. The man who calculated firing solutions when optical rangefinders gave him a target. Yamada's face was white. Captain, we have inbound aircraft, massive strike, all quadrantes, we need to get underway immediately. Saito watched the explosions march across the harbor. A fuel depot erupted in orange flame. An ammunition barge detonated with such force that he felt it in his chest from 2 miles away. How many aircraft? Radar shows over 100 contacts, sir. More launching from carriers to the east. Saito turned to look at his fire control officer. Really look at him. Yamada was sweating, his hands were shaking. The young man had never seen combat. This was his first real action. Where is Agano, the cruiser? Agano was moored 300 yards to port. Saito could see her clearly. 8,000 tons, 730 men, his former command before he transferred to Katori 6 months ago. He knew her captain. They'd served together in China. Agano is preparing to get underway, sir. She's cutting her moorings now. Saito watched his old ship. Men were running on her decks. Smoke poured from her stacks as she built steam. He could see the anti-aircraft guns traversing tracking targets. Then 3 Dauntless dive bombers came down on her like falling stars. The first bomb hit forward near the bow. The second hit amidships. The third hit the stern. For a moment, nothing happened. Agano just sat there, smoke pouring from 3 massive holes in her deck. Saito could see men moving, damage control parties running. The ship was still alive, still fighting. Then the ammunition magazine detonated. The explosion was beyond description, not just sound, not just light. It was a physical presence that knocked men off their feet half a mile away. A fireball rose 300 feet into the air. The blast wave shattered windows on every ship in the anchorage. When the smoke cleared 4 minutes later, Agano was gone. Simply gone. As if a ship carrying 730 men had never existed. Saito's teacup slipped from his hand and shattered on the deck. Captain Yamada said quietly, "We need to leave." "Now, no. Sir, there is a hospital ship moored at the North Pier. 300 wounded men. We don't abandon wounded men. Captain, if we stay, we die." Saito looked at his fire control officer, saw the fear, saw the intelligence, saw a young man who understood exactly what was happening and wanted desperately to survive it. "Prepare the ship to get underway," Saito said. 10 minutes. Notify destroyers Maikaze and Nawaki that they will escort us to Saipan, and send a message to the hospital ship that we're coming to provide cover. Yamada opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Sir, the radar is showing large surface contacts to the east. Capital ships, possibly battleships. They're closing." Saito waved a hand dismissively. "Ignore the radar, Lieutenant. Trust your eyes. Battleships engage at 10 miles, maybe 12. We have hours before they're a threat. The immediate danger is aircraft. Focus on that." "But sir, the Americans have new radar systems. Their fire control is supposed to be very advanced. What if they can engage from longer ranges?" Saito smiled. It was a sad smile, almost pitying. "You've been reading too much intelligence, Lieutenant. Radar cannot replace the human eye. A machine cannot calculate what a trained crew knows by instinct. The Americans have better industry, yes, more resources. But naval warfare has fundamental rules. You cannot hit what you cannot see. That's not technology, Yamada. That's physics." He put a hand on the younger officer's shoulder. "I know you're frightened. That's good. Fear keeps you sharp. But don't let it cloud your judgment. We follow doctrine. We trust our training. And we survive by doing what we've always done. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Now get this ship moving. We leave in 8 minutes." Yamada saluted and ran back inside. Saito stood alone on the bridge wing watching Truk burn. 200 miles to the east on a battleship Saito had never seen and would never live to understand, another man was also drinking his morning coffee. Captain James McCready was 42 years old, born in Cleveland, Ohio when Theodore Roosevelt was president. Graduated from Annapolis in 1924, spent 5 years teaching mathematics at a high school in Canton before the Navy called him back in 1940. He'd taken command of USS Iowa exactly 1 year ago, February 22nd, 1943. The newest, fastest, most technologically advanced battleship ever built. 57,000 tons, 9 16-inch guns, 33 knots, and a fire control system that could calculate trajectories a human brain couldn't comprehend. McCready stood in Iowa's Combat Information Center watching the radar plot. 4 green contacts, range 32,000 yards, bearing 015, speed 18 knots. They were running. An officer approached. Lieutenant Thomas Chen, 28 years old, Chinese-American, brilliant mathematician, graduated MIT in 1938, joined the Navy in 1940 because he wanted to prove something to people who looked at his face and questioned his loyalty. Chen was the best fire control officer McCready had ever seen. He understood the Mark 8 radar system better than the engineers who designed it, could calculate firing solutions in his head faster than some men could work a slide rule. Sir Chen said, "We have solid tracking on all 4 contacts, confirmed as 1 light cruiser and 3 destroyers. They're maintaining course and speed, running for Saipan." McCready sipped his coffee. It was terrible. Navy coffee always was. "How long until we're in range?" "That depends on what you mean by range, sir." McCready smiled. "Effective range, real range, range where we can actually hit something." Chen paused. This was the question he'd been waiting for, the question that would define everything that happened next. "Traditional doctrine says 15,000 yards for battleship engagement, sir. Maybe 18,000 if conditions are optimal and you're willing to expend a lot of ammunition. And with the Mark 8 system, sir, we can end at 30,000 yards. Maybe more. Can engage or can hit?" Chen met his captain's eyes. "Can hit, sir. The mathematics work. The system can calculate solutions at ranges where optical fire control is impossible. We proved it in tests off Pearl. But we've never done it in combat. Never fired at a real target that's shooting back." McCready looked at the radar plot. 4 ships, running for their lives, already damaged by carrier strikes, exhausted, desperate. He thought about what this meant, not tactically, strategically, philosophically. The aircraft carriers had already won the battle. In 6 hours of strikes, they destroyed 250 aircraft and sunk 32 ships. Truck was finished. These 4 ships fleeing north were just cleanup. Submarines could handle them. Carrier strikes could finish them tomorrow. But Admiral Spruance wanted a surface action. McCready knew why. Congress was asking questions. 4 Iowa-class battleships, billions of dollars, thousands of men, the newest, most advanced warships ever built. And in 2 years of war, they'd barely fired their guns at enemy ships. The carriers were doing everything. Fast carrier task forces launching strikes from 200 miles away. Submarines strangling Japan's supply lines. Amphibious assaults supported by naval gunfire. But battleship versus battleship. The thing these ships were designed to do but almost never happened anymore. Spruance needed to justify the expense, to show that battleships still mattered, that they could do things carriers couldn't. McCready understood. He also understood something else, something darker. This engagement wouldn't prove battleships were still relevant. It would prove they were obsolete. Because if Iowa could hit targets from 20 miles away, from ranges where the enemy couldn't even see them, where courage and training and fighting spirit meant nothing, where it was just mathematics and machines and cold calculation, then what was the point? The Japanese believed in decisive battles, in honor, in men looking each other in the eye and proving their worth through sacrifice. Iowa was about to prove that none of that mattered anymore, and that felt like killing something bigger than 4 ships. But orders were orders. Fire control, McCready said quietly. Calculate a firing solution, range bearing and time on target. Assume we engage at maximum effective range. I want to know if we can do this. Aye, sir. Chen turned to his console. His hands moved across the inputs. Range, bearing, target speed, target course, wind, temperature, air density, Earth's rotation. The Mark 8 Rangekeeper was a mechanical marvel. 3 tons of precision gears, cams, and differential mechanisms. It solved equations that would take a human team hours and seconds. It clicked and hummed. Gears turned. Calculations emerged. Chen read the output. His face was expressionless. Solution acquired, sir. Target range 32,000 yards, 18.2 statute miles. Recommended barrel elevation 43.7 degrees. Time of flight 87 seconds. Probability of hit with first salvo 12%. Probability of straddle with second salvo 78%. Probability of destructive hit within 5 salvos 94%. McCready was quiet for a long moment. 18 miles, yes sir. They won't even see us. No sir, and we can hit them. Yes sir, we can hit them. McCready set down his coffee cup. His hand was steady. Prepare the ship for surface action. Load armor-piercing rounds in turrets 1 and 3. High explosive in turret 2. We'll use HE for the initial salvos. Once we have the range, we'll switch to AP if they have any fight left in them. Aye, sir. And Lieutenant, yes, sir. This is going to set a record. Longest range naval gunfire engagement in history. Make sure the log reflects that. Make sure it's accurate. Because people are going to ask about this for a long time. Chen nodded slowly. Sir, do you think this is right, hitting them from a range where they can't shoot back? McCready looked at his fire control officer, saw the doubt, saw the intelligence, saw a young man who understood that they were about to do something that would change naval warfare forever. No, Lieutenant, I don't think it's right. I think it's effective. And sometimes effectiveness is all we have. He picked up the intercom. All hands, this is the captain. We are preparing for surface action against enemy vessels fleeing the Truk anchorage. This will be a long-range engagement using radar-directed fire control. Gun crews to your stations. This is not a drill. We will commence firing in approximately 45 minutes. He hung up the intercom and looked at Chen. Get me a firing solution every 30 seconds. I want to know exactly where they are and exactly where they're going. When we open fire, I want the first salvo to be perfect. Yes, sir. In turret 2-3 decks below and 400 feet forward, Seaman First Class Bobby Sullivan heard the captain's voice over the intercom and felt his stomach drop. Bobby was 19 years old. From Des Moines, Iowa, farm boy, high school football star, joined the Navy 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor because everyone was joining and he wanted to do his part. He'd been assigned to Iowa's turret crew, loading shells. Each shell weighed 2,700 pounds. Each powder charge was 6 silk bags, 110 pounds per bag. You loaded them with a hydraulic rammer that could crush a man if you weren't careful. For 18 months, Bobby had trained, loaded practice shells, fired at target sleds towed behind destroyers. He was good at it, fast, efficient. His crew could load and fire 2 rounds per minute per gun, which was faster than most battleship crews. But they'd never fired at a real target, never aimed at actual human beings. Now they were going to. Bobby opened his notebook, a diary he'd been keeping since boot camp, small, leather-bound thing his mother had given him. Write every day, she'd said, so you remember, so you can tell us when you come home. He wrote February 17th, 1944. Morning, we're about to fire at Japanese ships, real ones. Lieutenant Chen says we might be shooting from almost 20 miles away. I don't know how that's possible. How do you hit something you can't even see? I keep thinking about Diane, the girl back home. We went to 3 dances before I shipped out. She kissed me once, said she'd wait for me. I wonder if she means it. I wonder if I'll get to find out. Mom always said killing is a sin, but this is war. So I guess it's different. I guess it's duty. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore except that in about 40 minutes, I'm going to help load shells that will kill people I've never met. People who are probably scared just like me. People who probably have mothers and girls back home too. I just want to do my job and go home. Bobby closed the notebook. Above him, the massive 16-inch gun barrel, 66 feet long, weighing over 100 tons, began to elevate. 43.7 degrees, nearly halfway to vertical. The turret officer's voice came over the intercom. All crew stand by to load. This is not a drill. We are weapons free. Load on my command. Bobby looked at the shell suspended by the loading crane. 2,700 pounds of high explosive death. A Mark 13 shell, designed to fragment, to create a storm of shrapnel that would tear through anything not protected by heavy armor. The powder bags sat ready. 6 of them. 660 pounds of smokeless powder. Enough to launch that shell nearly 25 miles through the air. The mathematics were impossible. A shell flying for 90 seconds, rising 7 miles high, falling back down, and hitting a moving target 20 miles away. But the machines could do it. The Mark 8 radar could track. The rangekeeper could calculate. The guns could fire. All Bobby had to do was load. He put his hand on the shell. The steel was cool, smooth, precisely machined. Soon it would be hot. Then it would be flying. Then it would be killing. Ready to load, the turret officer said. Bobby took a deep breath. Ready, he said. On Katori's bridge, Lieutenant Yamada was watching the radar scope when something changed. The 2 large contacts that had been closing from the east, they'd stopped closing. They were maintaining distance. 30,000 yards, just sitting there, following, not approaching. Captain Yamada said the American battleships are pacing us. Range is holding steady at about 17 miles. Saito nodded. They're being cautious. Good. That gives us time. How long until we're out of their patrol area? At current speed, about 6 hours, sir. Then we maintain course, maximum speed, and we watch for submarines. That's the real threat, not battleships 17 miles away. Sir, what if they have new fire control systems? What if they can engage from this range? Saito smiled patiently. Yamada, do you know why I trust optical rangefinders more than radar? No, sir, because I can see what I'm shooting at. I can judge distance with my eye. I can watch the fall of shot and correct. Radar is just numbers on a screen. It can't replace experience. It can't replace training. And it certainly can't replace the certainty of seeing your target with your own eyes. He gestured toward the horizon. Do you see any ships out there, Lieutenant? No, sir. Neither do I, which means they can't see us, which means they can't hit us. Physics. Yamada, not technology, simple physics, Yamada wanted to argue, wanted to explain that radar changed the physics, that machines could calculate what eyes couldn't see, that the Americans had spent billions developing systems specifically designed to hit targets beyond visual range. But Saito was his captain, 27 years at sea. trained by Admiral Togo, a man who'd survived this long by trusting his instincts and his experience. So Yamada said nothing. He just watched the radar screen, watched the two large contacts holding position 17 miles astern, watched and waited and tried not to think about what Lieutenant Chen on USS Iowa was doing at that exact moment, because Chen was inputting the final firing solution. Range 32,000 yards, bearing 015, target speed 18 knots, target course 340, wind speed 12 knots from the east, air temperature 82 degrees, humidity 78%, barometric pressure 30.02 inches. The rangekeeper hummed and clicked. Gears turned. Calculations emerged. Fire solution locked, Chen said. All three turrets are synced. We can fire on your command, sir. McCready stood on Iowa's bridge. He had binoculars raised, looking toward the horizon, seeing nothing, just empty ocean and empty sky. Somewhere beyond that horizon, 4 ships were running. Men were at their stations. Captains were making decisions. Sailors were hoping to survive, and they had no idea what was about to happen. McCready lowered his binoculars. Fire control, you may engage when ready. Aye, sir. Turret 2, you are weapons free. Fire. In Turret 2, Bobby Sullivan heard the command and pulled the firing lever. 3 16-inch guns fired simultaneously. The sound was beyond description. Not just loud, it was a physical presence. A pressure wave that made your lungs compress and your ears ring and your bones vibrate. The entire ship, 57,000 tons of steel, shuddered, moved sideways in the water from the recoil. 3 shells, each weighing 2,700 pounds, left the barrels at 2,600 feet per second, nearly 2,000 miles per hour. They climbed, higher, higher, higher. At the apex of their flight, 36,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, they hung for a fraction of a second. Then they fell, accelerating, spinning, screaming through the air at speeds that created shockwaves, toward men who didn't know they were coming. Time of flight, 87 seconds. Saito had 87 seconds left to live, but he didn't know that. He was standing on Katori's bridge, watching the sky, thinking about his son's letter, thinking about what he would write, thinking about duty and honor, and the old ways that had served Japan so well for so long. He was thinking about how radar was just a tool, how machines couldn't replace men, how fighting spirit and training and experience would always matter more than technology. He was thinking about how he would survive this, get to Saipan, report what had happened at Truk, help plan the counterattack, help restore Japan's honor. He was thinking about going home. 70 seconds. Bobby Sullivan was loading the second shell. His hands moved automatically. Hydraulic rammer pushing 2,700 pounds of steel into the breech. 6 powder bags following. Breech closing with a massive metallic clang. Ready to fire, he called. 60 seconds. Chen was watching his screen. The first salvo was in flight. 87 seconds to impact. He was already calculating the second solution. Adjusting for any course changes. Preparing to correct. 45 seconds. Yamada was checking the radar. The contacts were still there. Still 17 miles away. Still not approaching. He felt himself relax slightly. They were going to make it. They were going to escape. 30 seconds. McCready was looking at his watch, counting down, wondering if this would work, wondering if Chen's mathematics were right, wondering if they were about to make history or just waste ammunition. 15 seconds. Saito was pouring another cup of tea. 10 seconds. The shells were falling now, screaming down through the atmosphere, faster than sound, faster than anything natural. 5 seconds. Yamada heard something. A sound like freighted trains falling from the sky. He looked up, saw nothing. 3 seconds. Saito heard it too, started to turn toward the sound. 1 second. 3 shells hit the water around Katori in a perfect straddle. One ahead, one behind, one alongside so close that shrapnel peppered the deck. And the 4th shell, from a slight misalignment in Turret 2's loading mechanism, struck Katori directly amidships. It punched through 1 inch of deck armor like paper, penetrated deep into the ship, into the engineering spaces, into the place where steam and oil and men worked together to push the cruiser through the water. And then it detonated. The explosion killed 17 men instantly. The blast ruptured steam pipes. Superheated steam at 600 degrees filled the compartments. Men didn't die, they cooked. The lights went out. Katori shuddered. Her speed dropped. 18 knots to 14 to 10 to 8. Saito grabbed the railing. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead. Around him the bridge was chaos. Men shouting, alarms blaring, smoke pouring up from below. "Damage report," he shouted. An officer stumbled toward him, his face blackened by smoke. "Engineering spaces destroyed, sir. At least 17 dead. Multiple steam pipe ruptures. We're down to one boiler. Maximum speed 8 knots. Yamada appeared at Saito's side. "Captain, we have to abandon ship." "No, sir, we cannot survive another hit like that. We need to evacuate while we still can." Saito looked at his fire control officer, looked at the fear in his eyes, looked at the intelligence that had always made Yamada such a valuable officer, and then he looked at the radar screen. At the two contacts still sitting 17 miles away, at the ships he couldn't see, the enemy he'd never believed could hurt him from such a distance. He understood everything in that moment, understood that he'd been wrong, understood that naval warfare had changed, understood that fighting spirit and honor and all the things Admiral Togo had taught him were no longer enough. Understood that he was going to die, but he was going to die with purpose. Signal Maikaze and Nawaki Saito said quietly, "They are to proceed to Saipan at maximum speed. We will engage the enemy and buy them time." "Sir, that's suicide." Saito smiled. It was a sad smile, almost peaceful. "Perhaps. But someone must survive to tell Tokyo what we learned today." "What did we learn, sir? That we lost this war 20 years ago, Yamada. We just didn't know it yet." He turned to face the empty horizon where his killers sat invisible and untouchable. "All guns commence firing. Launch torpedoes. Everything we have. We fight. But sir, we can't even see them. Then we die with honor, Lieutenant. Fire." Katori's 5.5-inch guns opened fire at 2:51 in the afternoon. Lieutenant Yamada stood at the optical rangefinder trying to calculate a firing solution for an enemy he couldn't see. The rangefinder was a masterpiece of Japanese engineering, 15 feet long, precision optics. In perfect conditions, it could measure distances out to 12 miles with remarkable accuracy. But there were no perfect conditions, and the enemy was 17 miles away. Yamada could see nothing, just horizon, just empty ocean meeting empty sky. "Fire," Captain Saito ordered. The guns barked. 4 5.5-inch shells arced out toward nothing. Yamada watched through binoculars. Watched the shells climb. Watched them fall. They hit the water 2 miles short of Iowa. 2 miles short of a target Yamada couldn't even confirm existed except as numbers on a radar screen. "Adjust elevation," Saito said calmly. "Maximum range. Fire again." They fired. Again the shells fell short. Again they hit empty ocean. Saito stood at the bridge railing, bleeding from the forehead, watching his ship die around him, ordering his guns to shoot at ghosts. And from Iowa, the second salvo was already in the air. McCready watched the fall of the first salvo through powerful optics mounted on Iowa's superstructure. Even at 17 miles, even with the curvature of the earth hiding the target, he could see the water columns when the shells hit. One ahead, one behind, one alongside. One direct hit. "Straddle," he said quietly. "Fire control, excellent work. Adjust for targets, reduce speed, and fire again." Chen's fingers moved across the rangekeeper inputs. The first salvo had shown that Katori was slowing. Her speed had dropped from 18 knots to approximately 8. Probably engine damage. Probably dying, but dying ships could still shoot back. Dying ships could still hurt you. "Solution updated," Chen said. "Target speed now, 8 knots. Firing solution locked. All turrets fire." This time all 9 guns spoke. 3 turrets. 3 guns each. 9 16-inch shells, each weighing 2,700 pounds each, carrying 171 pounds of high explosive. The sound was apocalyptic. The recoil pushed Iowa sideways in the water. The blast wave from the guns swept across the deck like a physical wall. Bobby Sullivan, loading shells in turret 2, felt the heat from the gun breech wash over him even through the protective armor. The barrel was already hot from the first shot. The second shot made it hotter. Metal expanding, steel stressed beyond normal limits. Load the third shell, the turret officer ordered. Bobby and his crew grabbed the next round, 2,700 pounds suspended by a loading crane. They guided it into position. The hydraulic rammer pushed it home. 6 powder bags followed. The breech closed with a sound like a bank vault slamming shut. Ready. Stand by. The shells were in the air. 90 seconds of flight time. Climbing to 36,000 feet. Falling toward a ship that was trying desperately to fight back against an enemy it couldn't locate. On Katori, the second salvo arrived at 2:53. Yamada saw them coming. For just a fraction of a second, he saw dark shapes in the sky, falling, impossibly fast. Then the world exploded. 2 shells hit the forward section. One struck the #1 turret, penetrating through the thin top armor and detonating inside. The turret ceased to exist. 23 men died instantly, vaporized by the explosion or crushed by collapsing steel. The second forward hit struck just below the waterline. It punched through the hull, traveled through a crew berthing compartment where off-duty sailors were sleeping, and detonated against the forward bulkhead. The berthing compartment became a tomb. 31 men died without waking. The third shell struck the bridge superstructure. It hit 15 feet below where Saito stood, penetrated through 2 decks of steel and electronics and human beings. Detonated in the ship's combat information center. The blast traveled upward, through deck plating, through support beams, through the bridge itself. Lieutenant Yamada was thrown 20 feet across the bridge. He hit the bulkhead hard enough to crack ribs. Dazed, bleeding, he looked up to see Captain Saito still standing at the rail. For a moment, Saito seemed untouched, still upright, still commanding, and then Yamada saw the blood, saw the massive piece of shrapnel that had torn through Saito's abdomen, saw his captain's hands gripping the rail, not in defiance but in desperation, the only thing keeping him standing. Saito turned to look at Yamada. His eyes were calm, almost peaceful. "Tell Tokyo," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them the old ways are dead." He let go of the rail and collapsed. Yamada tried to stand. Couldn't. His legs weren't working properly. Something was wrong with his back. He crawled across the bridge deck toward his captain. Saito was still breathing. Shallow, labored breaths, blood spreading across the deck beneath him. Captain Yamada said, "Please, we need to get you to medical." Saito smiled, blood on his teeth. "No medical for this, Lieutenant." He coughed. "Listen to me. The ship is finished. You must abandon. Swim clear. Survive. Someone must tell the story. I won't leave you, sir." "That's an order, Lieutenant." "Live. Learn. Tell them we fought with honor even when honor wasn't enough." Saito's eyes closed. His breathing stopped. Lieutenant Yamada, 31 years old, brilliant mathematician, top of his Naval Academy class, sat on the bridge of a dying ship, holding his dead captain and understanding with perfect clarity that everything he'd been taught about naval warfare was obsolete. The third salvo from Iowa arrived at 2:55. This time 6 shells hit. The ship had slowed further. Was listing. An easier target. The shells tore Katori apart. One struck the aft magazine. The explosion broke the ship's back. The stern section began to separate from the rest of the hull. One struck the remaining engine room. The last boiler exploded. Steam and fire filled the compartments below. One struck amidships, blowing a hole in the side large enough to drive a truck through. Water poured in. The remaining 3 shells hit superstructure and deck. Shrapnel swept across the ship like a storm. Men died. Equipment shattered. The battle flag still flying from the mainmast was shredded. At 2:58, Katori rolled to port. 30 degrees. 40. 50. Men who were still alive jumped into the water. Some wore life jackets. Most didn't. In the chaos, there had been no time. Yamada found himself in the water. He didn't remember jumping. Didn't remember abandoning ship. One moment he was on the bridge holding Saito's body. The next he was swimming, his ribs screaming, watching his ship die. Katori rolled past 90 degrees, capsized, hung there for a moment, hull-exposed propellers still visible. Then she slid beneath the surface. 300 men had been aboard when the engagement started. Perhaps 100 were in the water now. The rest went down with the ship, trapped in compartments, crushed by collapsing bulkheads, drowned in the dark. Yamada treaded water, watching the spot where Katori had been. Oil spread across the surface. Debris floated. Men called out for help. And from 17 miles away, invisible beyond the horizon, the guns fell silent. McCready lowered his binoculars. He'd watched the entire engagement through optics. Watch the shells hit. Watch the explosions. Watch the ship die. "Cease fire," he said quietly. "Target destroyed." The bridge was silent. Officers stood at their stations watching radar screens that showed where a ship had been and now was not. "Time of engagement," McCready said. 11 minutes. Rounds expended 46 16-inch shells. Result: one light cruiser sunk. He looked at Chen. "Lieutenant, that was outstanding fire control. Please pass my compliments to the rangekeeper crew." They just made naval history. Chen nodded. His face was blank, professional, but his hands were shaking slightly as he made notes in the fire control log. Sir Chen said the other 3 ships are increasing speed. The destroyers are turning toward us. The 3rd destroyer is running north. McCready looked at the plot. 2 destroyers, Maikaze and Nawaki, were reacting to Katori's destruction. Maikaze was turning to engage, a suicide run, trying to buy time for Nawaki to escape. It was brave. It was honorable. It was completely futile. "Notify Minneapolis and New Orleans," McCready said. "Engage the attacking destroyer. Iowa will pursue the fleeing unit." 3 miles north of where Katori sank, Commander Kenji Nakamura stood on the bridge of the destroyer Maikaze and watched his flagship die. Nakamura was 39 years old, career officer, 15 years at sea. He'd commanded Maikaze for 8 months, knew every man aboard by name, knew their families, their hopes, their fears. He'd just received Saito's final order. "Proceed to Saipan. Do not engage. Survive." It was a good order, a sensible order, the order that would save his crew and his ship. Nakamura ignored it. "All engines ahead full," he said. "Come to course 180, directly toward the enemy. Load all torpedo tubes. We attack." His executive officer stared at him. "Sir, that's suicide. We can't survive an engagement with battleships and heavy cruisers. We need to run while we still can." Nakamura looked at his second in command, saw the fear, saw the logic, saw a man who wanted desperately to live and saw no reason to throw that life away. "How long until Nawaki is out of radar range?" Nakamura asked. "At current speed, approximately 8 minutes, sir. Then we buy her 8 minutes. The exec was quiet for a moment. "We won't survive 8 minutes, sir." "I know," Nakamura said, "but Nawaki will, and someone needs to get home. Someone needs to tell them what happened here. What we learned. What did we learn?" Sir Nakamura looked toward the horizon where the American ship sat invisible. "That courage isn't obsolete," he said quietly. "Even when it can't win, especially when it can't win. Now prepare to engage." Maikaze turned toward Iowa and accelerated to 35 knots. 2,000 tons of steel, 240 men, 8 Type 93 long lance torpedoes, against 57,000 tons of the most advanced battleship ever built, and 2 heavy cruisers that each displaced twice what Maikaze did. It wasn't even close to a fair fight, but Nakamura charged anyway. McCready watched Maikaze turn toward them on the radar plot. Watch the destroyer's speed increase. Watch the range close. "Brave," he said. "Stupid, but brave." "Fire control, can we engage with main battery at this range?" "Yes, sir, but I recommend we let the cruisers handle it. They're better suited for destroyer targets." "Agreed. Notify Minneapolis and New Orleans. Engage at will." The 2 heavy cruisers steaming in formation with Iowa opened fire with their 8-inch guns. Not as large as Iowa's 16-inch rifles, but more than adequate for a destroyer. The range was 12 miles, well within effective engagement distance for radar-directed fire. The first salvo straddled Maikaze at 304. Massive water columns erupted around the destroyer. Shrapnel peppered her deck. The second salvo hit at 305. One shell struck the forward gun turret, blowing it off the ship. Another hit the forward superstructure. A third hit amidships, penetrating to the engine spaces. Maikaze shuddered but kept coming. At 8 miles with her forward section on fire and her speed reduced, she launched all 8 torpedoes. They were Type 93s, the best torpedoes in any Navy. 49 knots, range of 20 miles, oxygen-fueled, leaving almost no wake, each carrying half a ton of high explosive. They ran true. On New Jersey's bridge, a lookout spotted the torpedo wakes. Torpedoes in the water port side. Multiple contacts. New Jersey's captain, a steady officer from Virginia named William Thompson, didn't hesitate. All ahead flank. Right full rudder. Sound collision alarm. Oh no, Jersey, all 57,000 tons of her heeled. Hard to starboard. The turn was violent. Men grabbed railings. Equipment shifted. Coffee cups slid off tables. The torpedoes passed 150 yards ahead of New Jersey's bow. Close enough that lookouts could see them. Close enough to feel the spray from their wakes. But they missed. All 8 of them missed. Nakamura had bought Milwaukee 6 minutes so far. He needed 2 more. The cruisers kept firing. 3:06, another hit on the bridge. Nakamura was thrown against the bulkhead. Blood ran from his ears. Concussion. Maybe skull fracture. Didn't matter. 3:07, a hit on the aft section. The stern started to flood. 3:09, a hit on the starboard side. The ship was listing now. 12 degrees, 15. Nakamura pulled himself upright, looked at the clock. 7 minutes. Milwaukee was clear. His mission was complete. He thought about his wife, about his 2 daughters, 8 and 6 years old. He'd promised them he'd come home. Promised he'd teach them to sail like he'd learned as he wouldn't keep that promise. All hands, he said into the ship's intercom. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Abandon ship. This is not a drill. Abandon ship immediately. Sir, the exec said you need to leave too. Nakamura smiled. I am the captain. I don't leave. Sir, please. Get off my bridge, Nakamura said. That's an order. Save yourself, live. Tell my daughters their father did his duty. The exec saluted, tears on his face. Then he ran. Nakamura stood alone on the bridge, felt the ship listing further, heard the groan of stressed metal, smelled smoke and cordite in the ocean. At 3:17, an 8-inch shell from Minneapolis struck Maikaze's forward magazine. The explosion was massive. The destroyer broke in half. The bow section sank in less than 30 seconds. The stern burned for 3 minutes before it too disappeared beneath the waves. 240 men, 17 survived the initial sinking. None survived the next hour. Some drowned, some died from injuries. Some refused rescue when American destroyers arrived, choosing death over capture. Commander Kenji Nakamura's body was never recovered. But Milwaukee was clear, running north at 37 knots, outdistancing the American battleships. Surviving. Mission complete. On Iowa's bridge, Lieutenant Chen watched the destroyer break apart through the optics, watched men in the water, watched the stern section burn. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said very softly, they died like warriors. Captain McCready nodded. They did, and we have to respect that even as we kill them. He turned to the plot. The fleeing destroyer. Can we catch her? No, Sir Chen said. She's doing 37 knots. We top out at 33. At this rate, she'll be out of effective range in 90 minutes. What's our maximum range? Theoretical maximum is 42,000 yards, sir. 23.8 miles. But we've never tested that in combat. Hit probability would be extremely low. McCready looked at the radar plot, looked at the green contact pulling away, thought about what Spruance wanted, thought about proving battleships could still matter, thought about setting a record that would last forever, fire control. He said, I want you to calculate a firing solution at maximum range, barrel elevation 45 degrees. I want to see if we can even get close. Sir Chen said carefully, at that range, hit probability is less than 5%. We'd be wasting ammunition. I don't need to hit her, Lieutenant. I need to prove we can engage her. There's a difference. Chen paused. Then he understood. This wasn't about sinking Milwaukee. This was about demonstrating capability, about showing that Iowa could shoot further than any battleship in history, about proving something even if that something was ultimately meaningless. Yes, sir, Chen said, calculating now. The rangekeeper hummed, gears turned, solutions emerged. Maximum range firing solution acquired, Chen said. Range 34,800 yards, 19.7 miles. Barrel elevation 45 degrees. Time of flight 105 seconds. Hit probability 4.2%. McCready smiled. 4%, I'll take those odds. All turrets prepare to fire. We're going to set a record. In turret 2, Bobby Sullivan heard the order and felt something close to disbelief. 20 miles, someone whispered. How the hell do you shoot 20 miles? Bobby looked at the shell he was loading. 2,700 pounds. It would fly for 105 seconds. Almost 2 minutes in the air, rising to heights where the air was thin, falling from the stratosphere. The mathematics were insane. The physics seemed impossible. But the machines could do it. Ready to load, the turret officer said. Bobby and his crew positioned the shell, rammed it home, loaded the powder bags, closed the breech. The barrel elevated to 45 degrees, halfway to vertical, like an artillery piece, not a naval gun. All turrets report ready, Chen said. Fire. 9 guns, 9 shells, each climbing into the sky like a rocket. Bobby felt the recoil through the deck, felt his bones shake, felt the heat from the breech even through protective gear. The shells climbed, higher than aircraft flew, higher than most mountains, 7 miles straight up. At the apex, they hung for a fraction of a second. Then they fell. 105 seconds. On Milwaukee, the captain, a young lieutenant commander named Ichiro Sato, watched his radar. The American battleships were falling behind. He was going to make it, going to get to Saipan, going to deliver Nakamura's sacrifice to Tokyo. He allowed himself a moment of hope. Then he heard the sound, like freight trains falling from heaven. He looked up, saw nothing, just sky. Then he saw them. Dark shapes, falling impossibly fast. 3 shells hit the water around Milwaukee in a perfect bracket, 160 yards ahead, 150 yards behind, 130 yards to starboard. The near miss to starboard sent shrapnel across the deck. 5 men wounded. Minor flooding from fragment holes in the hull, but no direct hit. Sato stood frozen. He'd just been straddled by shells fired from 20 miles away. From ships he couldn't even see on the horizon. Impossible, he whispered. Then he shouted, all ahead, flank evasive maneuvers. Weave pattern. Milwaukee began to zigzag. Port, starboard, port, trying to throw off the calculations. On Iowa, Chen watched the target maneuver, adjusted his inputs. The rangekeeper compensated, calculated where a weaving ship would be in 105 seconds. Solution updated, Chen said. Firing. The second salvo at maximum range launched at 342. This time the range was 35,000 yards, 20.0 miles. The shells climbed, fell, screamed down toward a target that was desperately trying to survive. Another straddle, closer this time. One shell passed 40 yards astern, close enough that Milwaukee's crew could feel the shock wave through the water. Sato was sweating. His ship was doing everything possible. Maximum speed, evasive maneuvers, smoke screen deployed, and still the shells were getting closer. One more salvo, McCready said. Maximum elevation. Let's see how far we can reach. Range is now 35,700 yards, Chen said. 20.3 statute miles. This will be the longest range naval gunfire in history, sir. Then let's make it count. Fire. The final salvo launched at 348. Barrel elevation 45 degrees. Range 20.3 miles. Time of flight 107 seconds. The shells climbed higher than they'd ever climbed, fell faster than they'd ever fallen. One shell landed 80 yards ahead of Milwaukee. One landed 60 yards behind. One passed 40 yards to port. Perfect straddle, but no hit. And then Milwaukee turned into a rain squall and disappeared from radar. McCready lowered his binoculars. Cease fire, he said. She's won. Log it. Longest range naval gunfire engagement on record. 35,700 yards, 20.3 statute miles. The bridge was quiet. Men looked at each other. They just witnessed something historic, something that would never be repeated. Sir Chen said quietly, we just proved Iowa can engage targets from 20 miles. McCready nodded. Yes, Lieutenant. We proved we can get close. Hitting is still mostly luck at that range. But we scared her. We proved the capability. And sometimes that's enough. He didn't say the rest. Didn't say that they'd proven this capability for a weapon system that was already obsolete. Didn't say that carrier aircraft could strike from 200 miles. Didn't say that battleships, no matter how advanced, were dinosaurs. He didn't have to. Everyone on the bridge understood. 4:15 in the afternoon. The guns were silent. The battle was over. 3 Japanese ships sunk. 575 men dead, one destroyer escaped. American casualties zero. Not a single hit sustained, not even a near miss that caused damage. It was the most lopsided naval engagement in modern history, and it proved something that no one wanted to admit. That courage didn't matter anymore. That honor couldn't stop radar. That fighting spirit was meaningless against mathematics. That the age of men looking each other in the eye and proving their worth through sacrifice was over. The age of machines had begun, and even the men operating those machines felt the weight of what that meant. Destroyer Burns approached the area where Katori had sunk. Hundreds of Japanese sailors in the water. Many wounded, all exhausted. Burns lowered boats to rescue them. The Japanese refused. Some shouted banzai and dove beneath the waves, choosing death over capture. Some attacked the rescue boats with knives, forcing American sailors to defend themselves. Some simply swam away into the open ocean, swimming until exhaustion took them. Lieutenant Yamada, bleeding and broken, watched the American boat approach. Watched American sailors reaching out to pull him aboard. He thought of Captain Saito, of the order to live, to tell the story. But he also thought of honor, of the old ways, of going down with his ship and his captain. The American sailor's hand touched his shoulder. "Sir, we're here to help. Please." Yamada looked at the young American face, saw kindness there, saw humanity, and chose the old ways. "Captain, stay with ship," he said in broken English. "I stay with Captain." He pushed away from the boat, took a breath, dove beneath the surface, and didn't come back up. Bobby Sullivan stood on Iowa's deck, watching through binoculars, watching men choose death, watching the water turn quiet as the last survivors disappeared. That night, he wrote in his diary, "We tried to save them. They wouldn't let us. I killed people today. I don't know their names. They died because they couldn't see us, because their radar wasn't as good as ours. Is that fair? Is that honorable? I don't understand this war anymore. I just want to go home." He closed the notebook and looked at the stars. Somewhere in that ocean were 575 men who would never go home. Men who'd done their duty. Men who'd fought with everything they had. Men who did defending ideas that couldn't save them. And Bobby wondered if the shells he'd loaded made him a murderer or a soldier, and if there was even a difference anymore. Tokyo, February 20th, 1944. 3 days after Truk. Admiral Koga Mineichi sat in his office at Imperial Navy headquarters while reading the report for the third time. The numbers hadn't changed. They never would. 32 merchant ships sunk, 3 cruisers destroyed, 4 destroyers lost, 250 aircraft obliterated, over 3,000 men dead. But it was one sentence in the tactical analysis that made his hands shake. American battleships engaged from estimated range exceeding 15.9 miles. No visual contact established before first hits. Fire control appeared radar directed with extreme accuracy. Recommend immediate upgrade of all capital ships with comparable systems. Koga set the report down, walked to his window. Outside through the morning mist, he could see Yamato at anchor in Core Harbor. 70,000 tons, 9 18-inch guns, the most powerful battleship ever built. Japan's pride. The weapon that was supposed to win the decisive battle. And suddenly, looking at her, Koga understood with perfect clarity that she was already obsolete. He called an emergency meeting. The chief naval engineer arrived within an hour. A cadre of tactical officers followed. "Can we retrofit Yamato with radar fire control like the Americans?" Koga asked without preamble. The engineer, a precise man named Tanaka, who'd spent 30 years designing warships, opened his briefcase and pulled out preliminary calculations. "Yes, Admiral, the technology exists. We would need 6 months for research and development, 18 months for production of the systems, 3 months for installation and testing. Total time 27 months. Koga felt something cold settle in his stomach. "We don't have 27 months. Can it be accelerated?" Tanaka looked uncomfortable. "Technology cannot be rushed by willpower, Admiral. The Americans have been developing these systems since 1938. They've invested billions, had hundreds of engineers working for years. We're trying to compress that into months. It's not physically possible." The room was silent. Officers looked at each other. No one wanted to say what everyone was thinking. A young tactical officer, barely 30, raised his hand hesitantly. "Admiral, if we cannot upgrade our battleships to match American fire control, What do we do? An older officer responded. We avoid long-range engagements. We only fight when we can close to 15 miles or less, when optical range finding is effective, when our superior training and fighting spirit can make the difference. The young officer wouldn't let it go. Respectfully, sir, how do we close to 15 miles when they can hit us from 20? The silence stretched, became unbearable. Every man in the room understood the mathematics. You couldn't close with an enemy who could destroy you before you got in range. You couldn't win a fight, you couldn't reach. Koga looked at each officer in turn, saw the realization spreading, saw the moment when theory became reality, when distant possibility became immediate truth. We can't, Koga said quietly. It was the first time in the entire war that a Japanese admiral had admitted out loud in an official meeting that they couldn't win. The war would continue for another 18 months. Millions more would die, cities would burn, 2 atomic weapons would fall. But this was the moment when Japan's naval leadership understood that the outcome was inevitable. Not because of strategy, not because of resources, because of mathematics they couldn't solve and technology they couldn't match in time. What do we do? Someone asked. Koga looked back at Yamato through the window, at the massive ship that had cost a nation's fortune, at the weapon that was supposed to ensure victory. We fight, he said. We fight with what we have. We make them pay for every mile, every island, every ship, and we hope that the kid becomes too high for them to bear. He didn't say the rest, didn't say that hope wasn't strategy, didn't say that courage couldn't stop radar, or honor couldn't defeat cruise missiles, or fighting spirit couldn't compensate for being blind. He didn't have to. Everyone understood. April 7th, 1945. 14 months later, Yamato steamed north toward Okinawa on a suicide mission called Operation Tengo. One-way trip, just enough fuel to reach the island, no fuel to return. The plan was simple and desperate. Beach the battleship on Okinawa's shore, use her 18-inch guns as stationary artillery until American forces destroyed her, tie down enemy resources, inflict casualties, make them pay. It was the plan of a navy that had run out of options. Yamato carried 3,332 men. Most were young, many had never seen combat. They knew this was a suicide mission. They went anyway because orders were orders and duty was duty, and Japan needed them. At 12:30 in the afternoon, 280 American aircraft from 11 carriers attacked. Yamato's crew fought back with everything they had, anti-aircraft guns firing continuously, 18-inch main batteries loaded with special anti-aircraft shells, men at their stations doing their jobs with precision and courage. It didn't matter. For 2 hours, the aircraft swarmed, bombs falling, torpedoes running, explosions rippling across the massive ship, 13 torpedo hits, 7 bomb hits, fires raging, compartments flooding, men dying. The 18-inch guns, the most powerful naval rifles ever created, never fired at an American battleship, never engaged the targets they were designed to destroy, because American battleships never got close enough to be seen. At 2:23 in the afternoon, Yamato's forward magazines detonated. The explosion was visible from 100 miles away. The mushroom cloud rose 20,000 feet. Debris rained from the sky for 10 minutes. 2,498 men died. 252 survived. And the age of the battleship died with her. USS Iowa had a different fate. She survived World War II, served in Korea bombarding shore positions, was mothballed in 1958, brought back for modernization in 1984. By then, the world had changed completely. Iowa was fitted with Tomahawk cruise missiles that could strike from 1,000 miles away, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, modern radar, communication systems that would have seemed like science fiction in 1944. But she kept her 9/16-inch guns, because nothing built since could match their raw destructive power. February 1991, Operation Desert Storm. Iowa and her sister Wisconsin fired their 16-inch guns for the last time in combat, bombarding Iraqi positions in Kuwait, 47 years after Truk. The shells were just as devastating, the accuracy just as impressive. The raw kinetic energy of 1,500 pounds of steel, traveling at 1,800 miles per hour, hitting a target was something no modern weapon could replicate. But the cruise missiles were more accurate, longer ranged, Didn't require 1,000 sailors to operate. Could strike any target in Iraq from ships that never entered coastal waters. The big guns were impressive, spectacular even, but they were obsolete. Iowa was decommissioned in 1990, officially struck from the Naval Vessel Register in 2006, became a museum ship in Los Angeles in 2012. The record set on February 17, 1944 still stands. 35,700 yards, 20.3 statute miles, the longest-range naval gunfire engagement in history. Not because no one can break it, but because no one builds battleships anymore. Bobby Sullivan came home in 1946. He was 21 years old, had seen things no 21-year-old should see, had done things that would wake him up at night for the next 50 years. He married Diane, the girl from the dances, the girl who'd kissed him once and said she'd wait. She had waited. They moved to a small house outside Des Moines. Bobby opened a hardware store with his discharge bonus and a loan from Diane's father. They had 3 children, lived a quiet life, a good life. Bobby never talked about the war. Not to Diane, not to his children, not to anyone. He kept the diary, put it in a box in the attic, didn't look at it for 40 years. In 1985, his grandson Tommy, 12 years old and fascinated by history, found the box, found the diary, read the entries. Grandpa Tommy asked at Sunday dinner, "Did you kill anyone in the war?" The table went silent. Diane's hand tightened on her fork. Bobby's daughter looked horrified. His son-in-law stared at his plate. Bobby was quiet for a long time, looking at his grandson, seeing himself at 12, seeing innocence that didn't understand what it was asking. "Yes," Bobby said finally, "I killed people. Enough to know that every one of them was someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father. Just like me." "How many?" Bobby looked at his hands. 70-year-old hands that had loaded shells when they were 19. "I don't know," he said. "I loaded the shells. Other men aimed the guns. Other men gave the orders. But we all killed them together, 575 men in 90 minutes. And they never even saw us." Tommy was quiet, processing. Then, "Was that fair?" Bobby smiled. It was a sad smile. The smile of a man who'd spent 40 years thinking about that exact question. "No," he said. "It wasn't fair. War isn't fair. We had better technology, better training, better resources. They had courage and honor and fighting spirit. And we killed them anyway because our machines were better than their machines. Fair didn't enter into it. Do you feel bad about it?" "Every day," Bobby said. "Every single day." He died in 2001. Heart attack, quick and painless, the doctor said. Diane was holding his hand. His family donated the diary to the USS Iowa Museum. It's there now, on display. You can read it. You can see the words of a 19-year-old farm boy from Iowa who helped make history and spent the rest of his life wondering what that meant. Lieutenant Thomas Chen became a professor of mathematics at WWII after the war, specialized in ballistics and control theory, wrote papers on fire control systems, consulted for the Navy's guided missile program in the 1960s. He never returned to a battleship, never wanted to. In 2019, at age 96, the Iowa Museum invited him for a special ceremony, 75th anniversary of the Truk engagement. They wanted him to give a speech, to talk about the technology, to explain how they'd done the impossible. Chen agreed, flew from Boston to Los Angeles, walked aboard Iowa for the first time in 75 years. They took him to the fire control room, showed him the Mark 8 radar system, the rangekeeper computer, the equipment he'd used to calculate death from 20 miles away. Chen stood in front of the rangekeeper for a long time, not speaking, just looking. Then he started crying. A museum guide, a young woman who'd grown up after the Cold War, after the fall of the Soviet Union, in a world where battleships were already ancient history, asked if he was okay. Chen wiped his eyes. "This computer," he said, "helped me kill 575 people I never saw. People who never had a chance to fight back. People who died because their machines weren't as good as my machines. I was very good at mathematics, very good at calculating trajectories and compensating for wind and predicting where a ship would be 90 seconds in the future." He touched the rangekeeper gently, almost reverently. "But I don't know if that made me a good person." He gave his speech, talked about the technology, explained the systems, answered questions about barrel elevation and time of flight and probability calculations. But his last words weren't about technology. "We proved that day that American engineering could do the impossible," he said, "that we could hit targets from ranges that seemed like science fiction, that we could turn mathematics into victory." He paused, looked at the audience, mostly older men, veterans, people who understood. "But we also proved something else, that making killing more efficient doesn't make it more honorable, that winning doesn't erase the cost, that every technological advance that helps us win also takes us further from having to look at what we've done." He died 6 months later. Quietly, in his sleep, his will left $500,000 to a Japanese-American reconciliation organization. The donation was anonymous, but the museum director knew. Lieutenant Commander Ichiro Sato would survive Truk aboard Nawaki. He wrote a detailed report about the engagement, about shells falling from 20 miles away, about the impossibility of fighting an enemy you couldn't see. His report reached Tokyo, was filed, was read by men who already knew they'd lost. 8 months later, on October 26, 1944, the American submarine USS Jalao torpedoed Nawaki off the Philippines. The destroyer sank in 4 minutes. All hands lost. Lieutenant Commander Sato, who'd survived the impossible at Truk, died in a conventional submarine attack. The kind of warfare Japan understood, the kind they'd trained for. But by then it didn't matter. The war was already lost. Not by submarines or carriers or battleships, by mathematics and radar, and the relentless march of technology that left honor and courage behind. Today, you can visit USS Iowa in Los Angeles Harbor. Walk her decks. Stand in Turret 2 where Bobby Sullivan loaded shells. See the Mark 8 fire control computer where Thomas Chen calculated death. Touch the 16-inch guns that set an unbreakable record. I visited in 2023. Summer afternoon, families touring, children running. The ship sits quiet in the harbor, massive and obsolete, and somehow still impressive. I watched a grandfather, maybe 70, take his grandson through the ship. The boy was 8 or 9, eyes wide, asking questions. They stopped at Turret 2. Grandpa, the boy asked, "Could this ship beat a modern Navy ship?" The grandfather looked at the guns. Massive things, 66 feet long, capable of hurling shells 23 miles. The most powerful naval artillery ever mounted on a warship. Then he looked out at the harbor where a modern Arleigh Burke-class destroyer sat, sleek, bristling with missile launchers and radar arrays. "Nobody," the grandfather said. "These guns could hit from 20 miles. But modern missiles can hit from 1,000 miles. Iowa was the best battleship ever built. But battleships aren't the best anymore." The boy thought about this. Then why did we build them? The grandfather smiled. It was a sad smile. The smile of someone who'd seen enough history to understand its ironies. Because at the time, we thought we were building the future. We thought battleships would win wars forever. We didn't know that aircraft carriers would make them obsolete. We didn't know that missiles would replace guns. We built the best thing we could build with what we understood. He put his hand on the gun barrel. Turns out we were building a museum. But we didn't know that yet. They moved on. The boy running ahead, the grandfather following slowly. Just another family on a summer afternoon visiting history. There's a plaque on Iowa's deck. Bronze, mounted near Turret 2. It reads, "On February 17, 1944, USS Iowa engaged enemy surface vessels at a range of 35,700 yards, 20.3 statute miles, setting a record for the longest-range naval gunfire engagement in history." This record stands today and will likely stand forever. Not as a monument to capability, but as a reminder that even the greatest weapons become relics when the world moves on. Below that, in smaller letters, "In memory of all sailors who served with honor. Friend and foe alike rest beneath the same ocean." The lesson of Truk isn't about American superiority, isn't about Japanese honor, isn't even about technology versus tradition. It's about the relentless march of progress, about how what's cutting edge today becomes obsolete tomorrow, about how even the mightiest weapons, the most advanced systems, the most impressive achievements become footnotes when the world changes. Captain Saito died defending a philosophy that naval warfare was about men, not machines. He wasn't wrong that courage mattered. He was wrong that it was enough. Captain McCready won using technology that made courage irrelevant. He wasn't wrong that radar and computers were superior. He just didn't realize they were making him obsolete too. Because even as Iowa proved that battleships could engage from impossible ranges, aircraft carriers were proving that battleships themselves were impossible to justify. Carriers could strike from 200 miles, could project power across entire oceans, could do everything battleships did and more. And today, as those same aircraft carriers patrol the oceans, they're slowly becoming obsolete too. Hypersonic missiles can strike from 1,000 miles. Drones can swarm. Cyber warfare can disable systems without firing a shot. The cycle never stops. Admiral Koga understood this after Truk, understood that Japan couldn't win with technology. So he made a different calculation. If you can't win the war, win the story. Send Yamato on a suicide mission. Make it legendary. Make it a symbol. Let her die spectacularly so that people remember not the defeat, but the sacrifice. And in a strange way, it worked. We still remember Yamato, still honor her crew. The largest battleship ever built, sent on a suicide mission, dying under a swarm of aircraft, has become legend. In defeat, she achieved immortality. Maybe that's the real lesson. That what we're remembered for isn't always victory. Sometimes it's how we face the impossible. How we did our duty even when duty meant dying for ideas that couldn't save us. Both sides at Truk did their duty. American sailors operated systems they barely understood to kill men they never saw. Japanese sailors fought with everything they had against an enemy they couldn't reach. And both sides carried the weight of what that meant for the rest of their lives. 575 Japanese sailors died on February 17, 1944. Not because they lacked courage, not because they didn't fight hard enough, not because they didn't do their duty, but because courage alone wasn't enough. Because fighting spirit couldn't stop mathematics. Because duty doesn't care about fairness. They died defending ideas about honor and warfare that were already obsolete. And the men who killed them knew it, felt the weight of it, carried it forever. Bobby Sullivan's diary ends with this entry written 50 years after Truk. I'm an old man now, 74 years old, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. Good life, good wife, good business. Everything I could have wanted. But I still dream about those men in the water, the ones who wouldn't let us save them, the ones who chose death over dishonor. I killed them with mathematics and machines, and they died with honor and courage, and I don't know which of us was right. Maybe we were both wrong. Maybe war itself is wrong. Maybe there's no right way to kill people who are just doing their duty like you're doing yours. I don't know. I'm just an old man who loaded shells 75 years ago and has been trying to understand it ever since. All I know is that 575 men died, and every one of them mattered. Every one of them was loved. Every one of them left families that mourned, and the fact that we had better machines doesn't make their deaths less tragic or our victory more honorable. It just makes it history. The record stands, 35,700 yards, 20.3 statute miles, the longest range naval gunfire engagement ever recorded. It stands not because it's unbreakable, but because there's no one left to break it. No one builds battleships anymore. No one ever will again. The age of the big guns is over. The age of men steaming into battle to look their enemy in the eye and prove their worth through sacrifice is finished. We live now in an age of missiles launched from 1,000 miles, drones controlled from continents away, cyber attacks that cripple nations without a single shot fired. And maybe someday, probably soon, those weapons will seem as quaint as Iowa's 16-inch guns, as obsolete as Yamato's 18-inch rifles, as ancient as sailing ships and wooden hulls. Progress never stops. Technology never waits. What's impossible today becomes routine tomorrow and obsolete the day after. But the men who served aboard these ships, who loaded the shells and calculated the solutions and gave the orders and died in the water, they weren't obsolete. Their courage wasn't outdated. Their sacrifice wasn't irrelevant. They were men doing impossible jobs in impossible circumstances, fighting wars that would change the world. making history one shell at a time, one calculation at a time, one decision at a time, and we remember them. Not because they had the best machines, but because they had the courage to use them, the honor to face what had to be faced, the duty to serve even when serving meant dying. That doesn't become obsolete. That doesn't get replaced by better technology. That remains. Long after the ships are museums and the guns are silent and the records stand unbroken because no one's left to break them, we remember the men. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough. Because in the end, that's all we leave behind. Not the machines, not the victories, not even the defeats. Just the memory of people who did their duty, who served with honor, who fought with everything they had. Even when everything they had wasn't enough. Even when the world was changing too fast to keep up. Even when they knew deep down that they were defending something that couldn't be saved. They fought anyway, and we remember. And 79 years later, standing on the deck of a museum ship in Los Angeles Harbor, looking at guns that will never fire again, at systems that will never calculate another solution, at a ship that will never put to sea again, we understand. We understand that greatness is temporary, that power is fleeting, that even the mightiest weapons become relics. But we also understand that the people who wielded those weapons, who believed in their mission, who did their duty even at the cost of everything, they weren't temporary. They were eternal. And the record stands, not as a monument to power, but as a reminder that everything changes, everything ends, everything becomes history except the courage to face what must be faced, and the honor to remember what should be remembered. That lasts forever. 20.3 miles, 575 men, 90 minutes that changed naval warfare forever and proved that even changing warfare forever doesn't stop it from changing again. History remembers. The ocean remembers. And the ships silent now in harbors around the world remember too. What they remember is both victory and tragedy, both triumph and sorrow, both the power of human achievement and the cost of human conflict. They remember that on February 17, 1944, in the waters off Truk, the age of the battleship ended. Not with a last stand, not with a heroic final battle, but with a demonstration that even superiority has its limits, that even the greatest weapons serve purposes that outlast them. And they remember the men, both sides, all of them, doing their duty, serving their countries, fighting with everything they had, right up until the moment when everything they had stopped being enough, and the world moved on without them.